come in and do a presentation on surveys, the importance and what to be expecting and looking for with surveys, how it relates to title insurance and your purchases. So I'm lucky enough to have Mary Slade. Mary's been with us here before. Probably the best counsel for title insurance in the state of Indiana, maybe even the Midwest or the United States, I'd go as far as. Been legal counsel for major underwriters. We're very lucky to have Mary at Metropolitan Title. And then Kevin is the CEO of McSteen, one of our vendor partners that we use for surveys. And you are the licensed surveyor for McSteen, and so a wealth of knowledge, and lucky to have him participate as well. So without further ado, I'll allow you to begin your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having us here today, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about surveys and title and part of your real estate transactions. So I'm Kevin Woeste. I'm with the CEO of McSteen Land Surveyors. I'm a licensed surveyor in Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. McSteen is a little bit about us. I'll go through the agenda, who we are, what we do. We're going to talk about an ALTA survey, so we're in the commercial transaction process, and then also a little bit about GIS. So when you compare that to just looking at your county's GIS, I'm going to go through and explain a little bit of what it goes into an ALTA survey. I think a lot of times people say, well, I have this transaction to close, I have to get a survey. Why does it take 3 weeks and cost $5,000? That's the number one question that I get as a surveyor. So I want to walk through the steps that go into what goes into an ALTA survey. And then we're going to give you some fun war stories about why you should order a survey. And Mary's going to jump in and talk about some examples she has, and I'll talk about some fun stories we've seen over the years of why it's so important to this process be part of your closing process. So a little bit about McSteen. McSteen's a third generation family business. We've been around for 55 years. We have about 80 employees across Ohio and Indiana. We've opened up an office in Indiana a little over a year ago. We have about, I think, 8 or 9 employees now working out of our Indianapolis office. And Sean is in our back joining us today. He's here. If you've not met Sean, great person to meet. And our mission is really to secure the land where we live, work, and play. And so we are out there empowering lenders and title companies and property owners with fast and accurate surveys and inspections. So we really want every part of your transaction to move through as fast and as smooth as possible. So when you talk about looking at a county's GIS versus what you would get an ALTA survey or certified ALTA survey, here's some of the pros and cons of what each can do. So can you show boundary lines? Well, on an ALTA survey, this is a certified boundary survey, right? So this is going to hold up in court. This is one of the most strongest legal documents that you can have. It is calculated, it is certified by a licensed surveyor, it's stamped. On a GIS, you're not really getting property lines at all. You're getting essentially a county is given a deed or a tax map area, and they're trying to trace that to make it work. And when it doesn't work, they make it work. So when the lines don't line up, GIS's lines have to line up, right? So they just kind of scrunch everything together to make it work. So there's not really any property lines shown. They just have to show approximately where things are for taxes. And that's really the main purpose of a GIS and an auditor site. Easements, which is what you're part of your Schedule Bs, easements, liens, any type of thing that affects the parcels are always shown on ALTA survey. And there's nothing you can see easements on most GISs. Major improvements, you're going to get accurate to the 100th of a 10th or 100th of a foot on ALTA surveys. You might see approximate aerial imagery. And just to let you know, most aerial imagery is flown about every 4 years. So when you go on a GIS, you're getting about a 4-year-old data set. Generally, I mean, it can be flown, so it can be 2 years old, it can be 1 year old, depends on when that flight is flown. Same thing with Google, they're updating about every year and a half. There are some new providers out there that can give you a little bit better data, maybe 6-month-old data, but nobody's giving you that you can buy, at least unless you're in the military, can get real-time imagery of what's going on site. So major aerials is you're probably going to get some outdated aerial imagery. ALTA survey is going to highlight potential issues. It's going to show encroachments, it's going to show anything that's going to be affecting the parcel. You're going to have strong assurance on property lines. It is the legal document that's going to hold up in court. A lot of times, if you ever have an SLR or any of the type of those SLR, those things don't hold up in court. They say at the bottom, "Do not bring this to court. This will be thrown out." It's yes.
I'm going to explain what an SLR is.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Don't hear that very often.
For exactly. So ALTA surveys are generally used on the commercial side for commercial transfers. Same type of thing where when you're issuing the ALTA, the Title IX series, the endorsements for the residential side, they have survey location reports. And so when you're transferring residential properties, you can order a survey location report to offer the owners and homeowners policies and get those survey endorsements. They're not required to be ordered in the state, but we recommend if you're trying to show things like easements, setback lines, any of those types of encroachments, fences, where the land, any type of issues, right-of-ways, access, the SLRs are the main vehicle that can help determine that on a residential property. You can use SLRs on the commercial side, but the state says it has to be a small commercial. So I think it's under 2 acres is what the law says. So if you have a small corner, little lot, commercial property, you can order a commercial SLR. You can also plot Schedule B items on it. You can show major improvements. But to say it's cheaper, it's faster because the laws of the state require. But it won't hold up in court. Not all lenders can issue all the endorsements off of it, or not all underwriters will issue all the endorsements for your lender's policy. So really, ALTA is the main vehicle. The ALTA NSPS survey is the main vehicle for most lenders, especially your higher dollar value properties. So when we see that, generally I say about $1 million and above, you're going to get an ALTA. Below, you can probably get an SLR. You can get SLRs. It has to be a little bit smaller of a property. So pretty much smaller value, little corner lot parcel, you can get by with a commercial SLR. If you're getting anything big, anything of value, an ALTA is really the way you want to go. You can get more endorsements on an ALTA than you can in a commercial SLR.
Plus minus on an SLR versus...
Yeah, so I think I have this on the next slide, but I'll go through it now. That's a good question. So typical plus or minus on SLR is about 1 foot. So your accuracy is pretty wide. On an ALTA survey, it's 0.02 of a foot. So you're talking about several degrees of accuracy difference. The other thing is an ALTA survey is a nationwide product. So if you get an ALTA in Indiana, you get an ALTA in Illinois, you get an ALTA in Ohio, they're going to be the exact same standard. States can be stricter than ALTA standards, but you can't be more relaxed than ALTA standards, if that makes sense. So when you order, if you have a client come in that has multiple properties in multiple states, you can say, I want an ALTA. These are my table A items that I'm going to order on. You should be getting a similar, maybe a slightly better in some states, but at least a minimum standard product across the country. And that's why they came out with the ALTA. It's really the ALTA, it's called the ALTA survey, but really it's ALTA/NSPS, which is the National Society of Professional Surveyors. So they 2 organizations come together to form what the standard is for that type of survey across the nation. SLRs, like I said, the same thing. You're going to get a lower accuracy. It's not going to be a legal document. You don't calculate property lines on it. You're using the deed that is being sent from the underwriter or the agent. And we plot the deed and we go out and we locate the improvements relative to that deed. And so that's why it's a plus or minus, because we're not actually calculating, we're not determining where the property lines are. We're just showing major improvements relative to where the deed is. So we're plotting the deed on the physical, the physical land with the deed is essentially what we're doing with that product. A little bit about the ALTA process. So just in general, I'm going to walk through each one of these things, but an ALTA survey is somewhere around 100 hours of work that goes into it. So it's between 80 to 160 hours. Now this can vary depending on the size, right? If you get a small corner lot versus you have this massive commercial apartment complex, there's going to be some difference in time. But in general, you're spending about 100 hours of work to produce an ALTA survey. And so when I say, and we'll talk about this, some of the horror stories of when you see somebody come in at a lower price and lower things, you start to wonder which one of these steps didn't get done, right? Because you have to skip steps to cut those hours less. So just a little bit about it. We come in, we're going to do a quote, and we go through the approval process. We do research. We'll go through pre-calcs, the field data, the calculations, the drafting. That's kind of the core part of it. We have the review and then the comments back and forth with the process. So when you come to us and say, I have a property that I want to be transferred, I need an ALTA survey. And we say, okay, great. Do you have your Schedule B? Did you get your title commitments from your title company? And you say, of course I did, because I ordered that weeks ago and it's ready for it to be delivered to you. Here it is. We love that, by the way, if you have no sarcasm there. So we go out and we'll quote the property. We do about an hour or so of research, an hour or two of research. We're looking at have we done any properties around here. We'll look through the county's information. Is there any surveys around? We look at aerial imagery. We look at all kinds of tax map records, any information to help us determine what the core amount of hours it's going to take to calculate it. That's why every survey is sort of quoted individually, because we do a lot of research to figure out, we want to provide you with the fastest, most accurate survey, but we want to quote that in accordance of how long we think it's going to take. Once we send that quote out, you say, go ahead, move forward, looks great. We then go through the research phase. This is about a half to full day worth of work. We're going to the county, we're pulling deeds. You have hired a title agency to pull all the titles, the liens, all the stuff that affects the parcel, but we are actually, as surveyors, required to do almost a similar amount of work. So we have to go out, and you've pulled most of the information on the subject parcel. We're pulling information all around the subject parcel as well. So we'll pull a bunch of information on the subject parcel, and then we're going to pull all the deeds for the north, the east, the south, all the different roads. If there's a road that goes through there, we're going to the IDOT and trying to get all the records for that. We're going to the county, trying to figure out where the main section of that land is. And then after that's done, we do what's called a little bit of pre-calculation. So we take all that information, we plot it in CAD, and then we give our field guys pre-calculated points. So when they're walking out into this massive field or this massive area, they're not saying, I wonder if the pin's over here. They're getting pre-calculated points loaded up into their GPS. And so they're walking over to say, I know the property corners are about 5 or 10 or maybe 30 feet in this area, so I have a better search area. And this is a newer leap of technology that we've been able to do this with over the last handful of years. This wasn't historically a process that was done. So it's enabled to speed up our process a bit. So we're now able to give the guys, the property pin should be right about here. And if it's within a couple of feet, they're moving on to the next point, looking for all the property corners around your property. Then they're also looking for the properties. Really, we start on most ALTA surveys about a mile away, approximately. So we'll show up to site, we'll knock on the door, wherever the case is, we'll see what's going on the property if need be, and then we leave. And I haven't seen those guys in a day. Well, it's because we're going out and finding the road monumentations, the section corners, your neighbor's parcels over here. Because once you figure out the outer parcel where your limits are, then you can work your way into calculating where this parcel is. So people think we come out there, we find the 4 corners and we leave. That's actually just the opposite. Really, the last 4 corners we find are the property corners. And by that time, we should know really well about where those 4 corners are, right? We've calculated from a mile away in monumentation box. We found a stone in a section corner. We found your neighbor's property corner. So we found all this information to help us hone in and calculate where that property corner is. So we do the pre-calculations, and then we go out into the field. The field is probably our highest variance of hours, right? We could be out on site for a day. We could be out on site for 3 weeks, depending on how big this property is. And that's really your biggest cost factor, right? I mean, you can go out there for a day. 8 to 40 hours is a big swing versus 4 to 8 hours on most of these that are 2 to 3 hours. So most of our time, we're trying to figure out, how long can we go out on site for? This is essentially a process as we're going out, and we have to collect not only the property information, but thousands of points of the improvements on the property. The curbs, the water valves, the gas valves, the hydrants, the back of the sidewalks, the parking stripes, right? Anything and everything on that property has to be highly mapped and located to the ALTA standard, right? So we're not only locating this, but we're locating this to the hundredths of a foot, right? This is a high accurate. So when we say there's a parking stripe there is a parking stripe within 200ths of a foot, and that accuracy of where that parking stripe is. And we're using some new equipment like robotic total stations that follow you around as you move around. We use high-grade GPS equipment, so it's able to, we don't have to have the direct line of sight. We can use multiple GPSs. We've used drones before. There's a process that you can use drones in that. We've generally found it has to be a very large site for us to use a drone on. Smaller sites, it's actually more efficient for us to just measure things individually. Now, we've flown like malls before where there's thousands and thousands of parking spaces and huge buildings. We will fly those sites and still do some locations to tie that in. It's not a very common thing that we use that often. I've had on my remote drone license for about 8 years now, and I think I've maybe flown 12 sites or something like that. So it's not a high volume thing that we see. So So we use the latest equipment. You come back when you're done, you have literally thousands of points in your data collector. Now what we do is we'll code these up so that we can say, oh, this is a fire hydrant. So when we come back to the office and you import that into AutoCAD, it brings up a symbol of a fire hydrant, right? Before this was able, you would shoot a point, label a fire hydrant, and then the CAD guys would have to go through thousands of points and say, oh, that's a fire hydrant. Let me go find that fire hydrant symbol. Okay, click that. Now add that to this. Well, taking that would take you days to draft up. Now the guys, when they go out in the field, they're coding up every single point they're locating. And when it comes into the field, it's actually mostly drawn. All the lines, the buildings, the parking stripes, the curbs, the sidewalks are pretty well done. It goes into calculations, probably one of the most important parts of the ALTA process. It's where we're applying our professional opinion of where the property lines are, and we're calculating those, and we're stamping and putting our certifications. This is from all of our research, all of our field observations, all of our pre-calculations. This is what we feel is the property corner. And it's our opinion too, right? So you can have two different surveyors go out to the same site. You could disagree on where things are. It's like an attorney. It's your professional opinion. Generally, we don't disagree that much. You might disagree by this much on a survey or so, unless there's a lot of ambiguity of where things are. It goes into drafting. This can take about a day or so to do, but like you said, you're taking thousands of points and you're trying to turn it into the most readable product that you can give to somebody, right? So when you get an ALTA survey, it needs to be the cleanest, it needs to tell a story in a 2D black and white image, right? It's very hard to do. We spend a lot of time trying to figure out, well, this line should be this hatch, and this one should be a little bit darker, and this text should read hatched in styles. So we spend a lot of time to try to figure out all the layers and text sizes and shading to make sure it's a highly readable, understandable survey that you get. So once it goes through drafting, it takes about a day or two with all your Schedule Bs that you've sent us, and all the easements and all the items on it. It goes into the review, back to the surveyor for sort of the final review. They have a pretty long checklist of the list that we're required to go through. Then it goes off to comments. It generally goes down as a preliminary survey. So if you see a survey, an ALTA survey from us, when you order our deliverable, it generally says preliminary on it. And that is sort of a standard that they've told us to use. That allows you to review the survey, provide comments back and forth without it being signed and sealed. Once comments are brought back and everybody's happy with it, then we sign and seal and it can be recorded at the county. So a little bit, here's an example of a survey, an ALTA survey, and just a little bit about the things that we show on it. So things like overhead wires, crossing the property lines, the gravel area. These are significant observations. And this is an interesting thing. So historically, over the last 15 years or so, this is so funny, we've been calling everything that would be affecting the parcel a significant observation. But if you order an SLR, so on the residential side, you can say encroachment. So I think it's because that the word encroachment is a legal term, and since SLRs can't be brought into court, you're fine using it. But on ALTAs, they want you to use significant observations. What's interesting is the new ALTA standards, which I'll talk about here at the end, that come out in February of this year, having the word encroachment on it. So now you might see us change the word significant observation to start to say encroachment. Like I said, we just sort of get advised what to put on the surveys and not. So they say significant observations. You might still see that for the next year. It might change to encroachments. Essentially, they're the same things. Is this affecting the parcel or not? But you can see the different ways that we list the significant observations. Like things like overhead wires. This has a concrete public sidewalk going through the corner of the parcel right here. So here's an example of what it would look like. Significant observations, we label them with the letters A through D. And you'll see A or C here. Public right-of-way extends 2.1. So there you go. You're a 1/10 of a foot measurement into the sidewalk. So as you go through, and your underwriter is going to insure this, they're going to say, do we want to insure a public sidewalk going into our parcel or not? Now the public has access, right, to our parcel because it goes into our property line. So we show this information, but we're not making any determinations as to any type of endorsements and terminations, right? We're just showing how does this affect what's going on in the parcel. You can see we showed the easements on surveys as well. This is a fun game of how many easements can we show and can you read them easily? Because sometimes easements over easements over easements gets so complex, it's really hard to show. And so really a good drafter, it's like an art. because you're using certain hatch marks to show different styles of easements and setback lines. So things like a drive easement, how a driveway affects the drive easement. And then you have like things like utility easements. There can be setback lines, parking lines, easements, any of the types of things like that. Even easements that are off the property. This is what was a new change in 2022. We now have to show the easement on the survey. We've always shown the easement on the survey, but before we didn't have to locate any of the improvements in the easement. In 2022, the standard says actually you need to now show all the improvements in that easement to show. So this is a good example. If you had an access easement here, but we didn't show any of that, you would be able to start to wonder, like, well, is there a road that comes into, or is it just an easement that they can improve at any time in the future? So now we have to show all the improvements inside the easements. And this is a good example of why it's so critical to have your title work done before you contract a surveyor. Because if we didn't have these Schedule B items, we would have no idea that that easement existed. So we'd go out and do the survey, right? And we'd turn it into you, and then you're like, oh, here's your Schedule B items. We go and plot this, and you're like, well, wait a second. We can't turn you the delivery survey. You just gave us areas that are outside the property lines have easements on it. We have to go back out in the field, so it's delay or it's cost or whatever, and locate all these additional improvements. Now, if we know this up front, we're plotting these easements well before it goes out into the field, and we're saying, hey guys, we need to locate this whole area right here because there's an easement running through this area.
There's two questions.
Absolutely.
One is it common, I never asked this before, is it common for if someone wanted a copy of the CAD file, or is that kind of a proprietary thing you wouldn't necessarily share with a client?
Yeah, so what we've seen is we as a company will not release any 2D surveys. So essentially, if you're transferring property, it's a hard no for us. Mm-hmm. And I think it's been, over the years, there's been a lot of lawsuits about giving CAD files out. What you see on the development side is that they're way more willing to do that. So if you're doing a 3D ALTA, which is really like a site plan for development, but you've used that site plan for an ALTA transfer as well. So it's like a multiple, they're digging. So you have to get a boundary survey, and then they turn it into an existing conditions for a site plan. So you have all the engineering plans, and then, okay, now the project's done, let's transfer it. So let's go do an ALTA on that. Those CAD drawings can be released, but generally they're released to the engineer and the architect, not necessarily to the owner. And I think the biggest reason is the liability. Once you release a CAD drawing to somebody, there's no way to protect. Somebody could replot that whole thing and replicate that survey. And it's even getting harder and harder now with AI. You can just apply stamps onto PDFs like it's no tomorrow, right? And I think it's one of the biggest issues the state's trying to figure out. Like, we're trying to figure out certified stamps and encrypted stamps and all these different types of things to inject into PDFs. But it's getting really tough. And it's so easy now to take a CAD drawing. And people like a property owner will take that and say, I want this property line over here a little bit. This my line actually goes over here. I don't want to worry about that. Sure. And they'll print it in there, and they'll.
So furthermore on that, I mean, how hard would it be for AI to take a PDF that has all those overlays on it that we see we can click on and import that into CAD and actually recreate it? I mean, for us as title companies, should we be should we be calling the surveyor to verify the data that we're receiving?
Yeah, I mean, it's getting easier and easier. We've seen some of that happen. The nice thing is AI hasn't reached, like, it's going after the big industries first. Mm-hmm. So luckily we haven't had it too much into the surveying industry. Okay. We're like the stepchild, like we're the bottom of the rung. So like we get the technology that rolls down for several years. But I will say that is for sure going to be a possibility. Okay. I think the states are recognizing that too. And they're like, we got to figure out a way to really encrypt this PDF. But generally, I would say if a surveyor is sending it to you and it's stamped and sealed or has preliminary on it, I think you're going to be a good to go. We have not had anybody receive it, but I spoke with the state of Ohio's state board 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the number one thing that they're now focusing on is the copies of seals. It's like they're worried now that the sealing of seals is going to be high. And that's not just for surveying. They're actually seeing it more on the engineering side than they are surveying. But it's engineering, architectural plans, all the people that use CAD and then have to apply a stamp and seal to it. They're going to have to figure out a solution for that, I think, for the future. Because if not, you can just get, AI will just be making up architectural plans, applying a fake stamp on it and selling it to people type of thing, and nothing will be right on it.
Are there any developments within the technology? Like the GIS thing that's nice about it is all the overlays. You go through and click, and maybe I don't know how to use PDF viewers, but you're saying like it's an art to display it simply, but is there any movement to having more dynamic software for people to review, click on and off overlays? overlays and that kind of thing?
We haven't seen too much. I do a presentation on AI in surveying. In fact, I'll be back in Indianapolis at their conference later in another month or two. But essentially, there's some new technology coming out that's really interesting that I think a lot of title people will be using. But essentially, that technology is you have a deed and you want to see it drawn out in a picture, and so you can upload a deed and it will auto draw out your property line. And it will show you closure errors, and it will show you can do Schedule Bs as well, and it'll plot all this stuff out there. We haven't seen any development on the PDF side of in-depth technology. You can, though, on a lot of PDFs. I think if you have some like the PDF Reader Pros, you can have layers turn on and off, so you can click and turn off and on symbols on them or text styles on there. Because when we print a PDF, naturally, I think all of our layers print with it. And we have about 30-some layers on the drawing.
You might know how to do that here. I don't.
Someone
has to figure that out.
Yeah.
All right.
And if not, we can be for sure to follow up and share with how we do that. I think we're going to go through some stories. I think I'm going to bring Mary up as well. Anybody have questions on the easement side of things, the plotting, the significant observations, or anything we do in the ALTA process? Absolutely.
Just as a point of emphasis, you can't really begin without the Schedule B. Well, many of us can't remember from day to day, like myself. A Schedule B is just a schedule of all the easements and restrictions that are on record with the county.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to know what they all are. And Mary doesn't care whether anything's addressed with the Schedule B or not. But because she's accepted, she's accepted ensuring that any of these easements are correct or restrictions. But the attorney for my client doesn't want any exceptions on the final title policy. So the Schedule B is really a document that ties title company to surveyor to free and clear title, insured.
Absolutely. It's one of the most critical documents. I think there's a Table A document which define the requirements, which we're going to talk about here, I think, in a minute, which define what go on the survey. So you get the options of 1 through 20 type of thing. And outside of that, the title commitment is truly the core piece of it. It integrates what's easements, documentations, deeds, history of the land is in that title commitment as far as process goes, and then everything that affects it. And Mary's team is going to go out and have that pulled. All the county do the search, going to send it over to us, and then we're going to try to put all those things on our survey as best as we can. Now, some of them might be like a gas easement to north of John's line, and we're not going to be able to plot that. But for the majority of the time, we're plotting and saying, does this affect the land or does it not affect the land? Or how does it affect the land if we can read it or not?
What about unknown pipe?
Unknown pipe, you got right.
So that's not on our B2 because we didn't know it was there. So now it's called on the schedule on the survey, and now we got to find out where that came from.
And that's the other thing too, I will say, not only is Mary's team saying us what's recorded, but when we're out in the field, we as surveyors have a responsibility to find any evidence of anything that's not recorded. And you'd be surprised of how often that happens, right? Well, we'll be out on site and all of a sudden we just see a sewer line or sewer manhole in the middle of the property. Like, this doesn't make sense. Like the sewer looks like it's draining that way. Everything's going this way on the property. Well, come to find out, they have, the neighbor just has a sewer line coming through. There's no easements on this, right? So we're calling out, and in that significant observations or miscellaneous, you're going to see this called out like unknown manhole. Doesn't really make sense to us. You guys should dig into this a little bit more and see who owns this, whether contact the property owner, contact the county, the sewer department. So it's not only is it Mary's team to look at what's recorded, but our job is to anything that we find when we go to the county to do our own research, we have to report to Mary and clientele. And also anything we observe out in the field that doesn't quite line up with any easements, we're required to highlight that to the title process as well. Anybody else have any other information before we get into some fun stories? These are the best ones, right? When you get to jump into what's some of the stories that you hear over the years. So I'll let Mary jump in.
So one of the things that we face, especially with development, is parcel splits. You have a large, like this L-shaped parcel here, and someone wants to have just the leg of the L. But in this example, as you can see up here at the top of the L, there's a road. But if you're only going to take this little piece, how are you going to get to the road? So that's one of the things that we take a look at on these splits. The other thing that we also pay attention to is knowing our counties where this is going on, because our 92 counties all have a little variation in what they want to do when it comes to parcel splits. I know some counties that are very simple. Oh, you want to split that L into 2 parcels? Well, just have the current owner do a quitclaim to themselves of the little bottom piece separated from the top, and then we're good to go. But then there'll be others who, well, we got to have an ALTA. We got to have the planning commission sign off on it. So you have, I'm just giving you kind of the variations, and then you have everybody in between. In this specific one, we're like, well, the road's up here. Look at 1300 South, county line's up here. Well, what are these folks going to do? Well, come to find out, party that was purchasing the little boot or foot of the L there owned land adjacent. So it's like, it was no big deal to him as the customer, because I'm like, oh, I own some of this stuff down here. So as a title company, we checked it out and said, well, you're entitled with 2 other people to one of these tracts. The other one's an LLC and another one was a partnership. So which one are you going to rely on? So he basically figured out, which of the people that I am developing with is this going to be the easiest ask for? And he says, I'm going to do an amendment with purchase agreement with the seller. He matched it up with the owner of this tract that he had a partnership with. Well, that makes sense. I can, go through here, through that piece of ground, and go right up to that there. Sometimes our customers don't think about it. They think I own, all this area over here. I'm just buying an adjacent tract. So we kind of delve into that as a title company, because you're the physical ancestry.com along with the Schedule B, and title people, we're the ancestry.com of what's recognized as the public land record. So that's what we're digging into to give you that commitment, all those Schedule B items. Now, this is a GIS picture, and this little green area kind of looks all kind of humdrum, nothing going on there on GIS. Get the ALTA survey back and see where these big brackets are. Well, this is an open drain that crosses this entire north sector of this development tract. There's a 70-foot wide maintenance and access easement when you're a legal drain in the state of Indiana. So a developer would have to consider, people are going to be coming into my development to what looks like a creek, but is actually a legal drain to maintenance that. Well, how many homes or how many businesses can I not put in that area? Because I've got to leave that swath of land open for Joe and Josephine County to come in to maintain the creek and to do maintenance. There's wetlands that were on here. Then we have the DNR. This one involved federal wetland areas. So those people need access. They need to take care of everything there. Well, how many buildings can I not develop in that area? How many can I not put in the easement area?
Is that recorded in the wetlands?
Yeah.
It is, okay.
Yeah. So for those particular came up. But if someone was just looking at the GIS, this particular county doesn't have an overlay that they're activating and putting all the wetlands on. That can also differ from county to county. So, the pictures also for the 92 counties are not only different. There could be something in the recorder's office, but visually you don't see it there. Maybe they don't have an overlay active. Maybe they don't even know how to put that on there. Maybe they don't want to take the time to put, a big square that says wetlands on it, and it's not going to be precise. So this one deal This was like a 4-year deal because of how large the tract is. I'm just showing you the north side. One of the funniest things that happened with this development, funny in regards to what we were doing as a title company, what we will do for our customers. The surveyors found a cell tower on this property. Well, there's no Schedule B items for a cell tower or a lease from the work that we did. So I'm like, what's going on? So there's information on the cell tower, who to call. And so they looked it up. We checked the adjacent property. They built the cell tower on the wrong tract. It was supposed to be a nearby tract and a couple, acre and a half away. Someone else owned the land. Someone else did the lease. So then there was discussion about that because your customer's going through, okay, there's a cell tower there. They have rights to go there. They have rights to maintain it. How many things can I not build in the access and that? And then they discover this. So the attorneys representing the parties had negotiations. Some of these people, cell tower companies way, way, way away. Their counsel's way away. We have local counsel and regional counsel representing the developer. So they came to us and like, well, how are we going to know that they're meeting their obligations? They came to an agreement of, we will let you come in, give you an access easement temporarily to come and take your cell tower down and go put it up. So it's kind of like a Lincoln Log kind of thing going on here with the cell tower. So they're like, how are we going to know when they're done? So Mary, being the, boots on the ground attorney, is like, hey, we've got an office that's so many miles away. Does anybody live near this area in the office? And they're like, yeah, Chad lives about 3 miles from the cell tower. I'm like, does he go by it when he comes into the office? Yeah. And I was like, Chad, are you willing to give us kind of a, hey, it's coming down? And so, yeah, we got a report from Chad. Half the cell tower is down. Then it was completely done. I love the picture of Chad where he's kind of doing a selfie with the cell tower in the background and it's gone. So, we just tried to get creative with how we could monitor that and then let counsel know, hey, looks like they've done all of their due diligence to take it down. So, yeah, it's good to think outside of the box in those occasions. This one's another interesting GIS one. Here's track 1. It's kind of this little odd football shaped one. And GIS had it that was adjacent to track 2, this triangle. The parties that were interested in this were going to do what I call a fancy car wash on track 2. My car wash as a kid was me in a bucket and water. This is, everything's done to your car type car wash up there. And then they were keeping this for development. They were looking at maybe doing an apartment complex, maybe mixed use with condos and commercial. So when they were looking at this and survey was ordered, and this is what happened. Here's our triangle. Here's our little funny football track down here, track 1. But what's this thing in the middle, in between them? And GIS doesn't show that. So what happened, this is a railroad spur of a major rail line that went through this town and on the side. This used to go to the depot on the east side of town. And if they needed some work done or had to let off passengers, they would just take the rail line up here or get off on the spur, let people off at the depot or do maintenance on the train. These parcels don't touch each other. So think about the issue your developer could have that this parcel is basically, except for this little tiny alley that was vacated, doesn't touch any roads. This is water down here. So they came to us asking, well, how do you solve this? This was a surprise that they got from the survey company. Survey company's looking, Mary, how do you solve this? So what we ended up doing, this former railroad area is now a Rails to Trails project, and it has gone to a charitable organization, and they've put a trail in there. Their deed doesn't describe this spur track. So we're like, okay, we're Ancestry.com of real estate. We found out who was the former railroad company, and we got everybody together. The railroad company and the charitable organization both gave deeds to the property owner, so we could basically create that he owned that strip. So when he conveyed the lovely boundary description we had for all of the tracts got conveyed to the new purchaser. He doesn't have to worry about anyone trying to lay claim to that item over there. I may have, yeah. There we go. So those are kind of the things that we can see with the surveyor that not necessarily the real estate records are going to say. We were talking earlier about plotting the deeds. One of the tells to the title company with that railroad issue was the fact that the north track's a triangle. The description went to the northerly line of the railway. And the description for the south track, the football, it went to the southerly line of the railway. So if folks were reading those legal descriptions, like, there's a gap there, because where's the middle with that? And the survey was great for showing that. I wanted to point out, and I think I did in my other presentation, I was kind of looking down the road. There's not a good look from it from the window, but if you go from Range Line to Main Street, where there's that multi-use development there on the northwest corner, that is the first three-dimensional survey recorded in Hamilton County is for that development. And we had to go to the recorder's office and kind of walk them through what is a three-dimensional survey, because there's condos, there's fee ownerships, there's easements, leases. So you had all of those thrown into the mix in that development. And that's where a three-dimensional survey is a great way of showing it, because it's a multi-level building, right? Going up. So that was a great way for them to see for the first time how that three-dimensional survey works.
Yeah. Cool.
Here's an example of what that would look like.
Do I have one? I'm sure I have an example. We've done interesting. We did a vertical subdivision. One of the first times I've seen. It's not very common, obviously, but yeah, each instead of having sublots at the horizontal level where you have individual lots, they had each of the floors as a sublot going up. And I think there's just a lot of creativity on whether you do condos in the structure of HOAs versus the case. But essentially, if you gave us like a lot, we just had the other week actually. Someone was buying something downtown, and they were buying multiple condo units on one transaction in the same building. So it's like, well, how do you show that, right? So we'd show the outside of the building and all the improvements, like the ALTA standards say, but you're also required to show what's being transferred, right? So, and we're not going to go in and, on a condo, we're not responsible for measuring the walls, which is because that's an architectural plan that's being recorded. So we plot those architectural plans on our survey. And so what you see is every sheet of the survey is a slice of the building as you go up. So what you'll see is instead of a one-page 2D survey of looking down on it, you're looking down on every single level as you go up the floor. So the survey ended up being, 10 pages or something like that. And every page was essentially the outer limits of the building and then whatever condo or whatever unit was being transferred as part of that deal. Something very similar happens when you do a vertical subdivision or something along those lines. But yeah, it's cool to be creative as you go vertical in buildings, different ways to finance, deals like that, because sometimes owners don't want to buy the whole building. They want to buy partial or, but they still want access, right? You have elevator access, utility access, all those kind of things on it that you can plot on those types of surveys as well. Just one fun story too is I had a transaction, and this is where we'll talk about tolerance, price, turnaround time, and expectation. So as I mentioned before, tolerance is extremely high in ALTA surveys. You don't get that on the SLRs, but on an ALTA survey or a boundary survey, you're going to get a high tolerance, right? It's 0.02 of a foot plus or minus. And it's a little bit complicated language. It says to the north and to the east, but essentially think of it if it's really accurate. 200 of a foot is like something like that, like an 1/8 of an inch. Pricing can be anywhere between $2,000 to $20,000. I mean, I'd say our average ALTA is probably in the $3,000 to $4,000 range. And just think of it at this point. If you put 100 hours into an ALTA, if if we ask Mary to put 100 hours into a project, your bill's going to be a little bit higher than $2,000 or $3,000. Right? Attorneys' rates are going to be a little bit higher, surveyors' rates, but essentially, that's how we calculate it. We say you're going to get however many hours, dollars per hour for our field people, times that by how many hours you're going to be out in the field, and that's our rate. So generally, we see if done correctly, it should cost you a couple $1,000s. And think about turnaround time. If I'm putting 100 hours into a survey, it's really hard to get a survey done in one day or 1 week, right? We can do multiple sections at a time where you're doing research and pre-calcs, and you're having 2 different teams work on that at the same time, and you're doing field and drafting can sort of be done on top of each other as they're out in the day one day, can be drafted the next day and that kind of thing. But generally, it's really hard to turn these things around in a very, very fast manner just because of the enormous amount of man hours that go into it. And before, like I said, Schedule B easements are always added. They're always significant observations, miscellaneous notes, the legal descriptions. The survey report will always be added to the ALTA, and they get recorded as well. One of the fun things is I get all the time, Kevin, I go out and I get 3 quotes, right? And I see there's one quote for $2,000, and there's 2 other quotes that are like $3,500 and $3,700. Why is that? Why do I see one company go really cheap and low and faster or something like that? And I say, you don't always have to pick McSteen, and we may be the right solution for you, we may not be. But what I recommend is find 2 or 3 good survey companies that have been around for a long time that do quality work. If you're not sure, ask a bunch of underwriters, right? They've seen a bunch of surveys. The problem when clients always go cheapest and fastest is they don't know what steps are being skipped in that 100-hour process. And steps have to be skipped. I mean, the survey companies aren't out there to do ALTA surveys to lose money, right? So there's something that they're cutting corners of. A great example was we were doing this nursing home. It was like a $34 million nursing home. It was a huge compound, right? Big acreage. It was transferred and bought by the owners 2 years ago. And it was done by a very large nationwide survey, ALTA survey company where they do nationwide surveys on it. And they were cheap and fast. So the owners went with them. They go to do a refinance 2 years later. And the attorney on the deal says, we're not using that nationwide company. We've had bad experiences. We want to use McSteen. We said, that's great. And the cost is more. They're like, that's not a problem. We'll have it done right. We go to the survey. And first of all, we got a copy of the previous survey that was only done 2 years ago. First of all, they said they were going to set the property corners. So there was no property corners set. So there's your first red flag. Like, okay, well, these guys obviously cut some corners. They didn't set property pins. First flag. Secondly, we're going out there and we're seeing that there's a building clearly like on the property line. And we're looking at the survey and there's no evidence of this building out there at all. And this is like a garage that goes into a house of the adjacent parcel. It is literally dead smack right in the middle of the property line. We're thinking to ourselves, man, maybe we missed something. Maybe there's an easement. Surely these guys could miss a building going through the middle of the property line. Sure enough, no, they did not. They just straight out either didn't see it, didn't locate it, it wasn't on the field, they cut corners, right? And what had happened is these homeowners claimed rights to part of this nursing home, and this was a multiple year blow up deal. A $34 million deal blew up. It was in lawsuits. I still don't even know what the end result was on this deal, but that's the problem when you go cheap and fast, is that you may think it's a great survey and they may look beautiful on the surface. And they thought that 2 years ago when they transferred the property. But what they didn't realize was all these underlying risks that they have accepted by going with cheap and fast and by not using a highly qualified survey company that's going out there and doing the work. So it doesn't matter who you use, just make sure you're using someone who's reputable, who's going out there and putting the hours in and doing the work. When you use big, nationwide, or cheapest and fastest, there's got to be ways for them to make money on that survey, so they have to cut corners somewhere. You just don't know where those are, and you inherently, and your clients inherently bring on that risk. And you don't find that out until you have it done correctly when they go to sell, and they've been wearing all this risk for this whole entire time. So just a little bit about the pricing, the turnaround time. That's why we say order early as possible when your transaction. Go ahead.
So in that case,
Yes.
and 2 years and we're selling it, we're not
Right.
just refinancing.
Mm-hmm.
And I have title insurance, and now we find there's something there that was never there. Mary, you're the new title company, or you're the existing title company. What happens from a legal standpoint when something like this arises that, hey, we bought this property, we got the ALTA survey.
Mm-hmm.
What typically happens?
So one of the things I see happen initially is do you have the same underwriter underwriting the new deal that also issued the policy on the prior deal? If they match, if it's the same company, then they're going to make a gut call internal about, are we going to insure it the same way like we did before, or are we going to address this head on? And other underwriters will look at that the same way, because someone's going to take their owner's policy and say, hey, I got an owner's policy and it's not on it. I want the same coverage. So that's looked at. I've also had situations where you go out there and there's a building or something on there and it's like, well, this wasn't on our prior survey. Well, yeah, we looked at the property card. It just got built and finished like 8 months, a year ago. That survey's 5 years old. That's why it's not there, because of the timing of when things were built. So there's a lot of factors that we'll take a look at and talk to the underwriters. I've even had buildings demolished between the initial
Absolutely.
survey and
Yeah.
the final survey too. So to me, it's really good homework by the title company and their underwriter to take a step back and breathe and try and figure out those puzzle pieces so they can give you great options on going forward. I've also been in the claims world. So the other thing too is if it's something that hits as a claim, what's the most expedient, but also puts the customer in the place they intended to be. So those things come into, yeah, I've had things where I've moved improvements because they were movable to ones where I had to order appraisals and figure out what was the difference in value with or without that problem. So all those things kind of go into the soup mix of options of what can happen. But I know that one of the first looks is, okay, you already got coverage in that area. Is someone going to give that same coverage for the next deal?
Would you say that the most time you would have maybe a slight issue with that is when the valuation goes from 34 to 37 and now the underwriter's taking on another $2 million in risk with that? Would that really play into it?
That does play into it, but you know, the other thing I think it has to play into is realistic expectations too. This was not a miss by the surveyor, but in Bloomington, and I will always remember it, large building, 25 feet in the county right away. That building's been there forever. And someone's like, you know, the entire side of the building, you know, you know, they're going, you know, like crazy, you know, what's going on? And it's like, you're the second, third largest economic driver in this county. It's been there in the road since whenever. And it's like 4 or 5 lanes on each side of the median. I don't think anybody's going to say, I want to go knock down, you know, that entire 25-foot swath. We ended up insuring over it because the building was so old and that problem had been there forever. I mean, those are part of those conversations of let's be real. Now, the surveyor, because I feel you in the background, like, ooh, you know, because it's like, you know.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
That's the right of way.
You know, the great benefit is they showed the right of way, they showed what the building was in there.
I think it's a great part of the partnership is our job is to highlight the potential issues. And then we put on the silver platter and say, here you go, Mary, here are all your issues. Now, what would you like to insure? What would you like to endorse over these things and provide coverage on?
So from a practical standpoint, many of the folks in this room have been in the business less than 2 years, and this is their first big deal, and it's just about ready to close. And then Mary goes, whoops, we got this issue here that maybe we're not going to insure. So all of a sudden, and this is a wisdom, don't spend your money from a commission until it's in your account. Now we've got to, as brokers, we've got to extend, amend, and wait for the title company to suggest a resolution.
That happens, and I think the other thing that is very important too. It's like you mentioned with timing, you know, all the documentation, when's the survey coming in. As soon as you get to a survey to us, as soon as possible. I mean, if you think you're going to get the survey Thursday, clue us in, hey, survey's coming in, because we're going to take a look at it, see what's there, because we don't want anybody to have any surprises, and we want to get those options there. The other important thing I would say with timing too is if you're having a split and you have a county who's like, yeah, we need a survey, let us know whether your client is working with the survey company and the engineers to have what the county needs, and who's going to be taking care of that recordable. We have customers who do those recordings because they have counsels like record as fast. We have other people who's like, no, you can go record it with the deed. So that also helps you with your workflow and the knowledge of where the county is, because nothing says sad to a commission and your client is when the county's like, wah, wah, wah.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have everything to have this deal go forward.
On the other side of that, if your counsel records it and doesn't tell anyone the day before closing,
Yeah.
you know, probably let the title company know you're recording that split or that thing, because it could change everything for all of our recordables, our deeds, our mortgages, anything that we're doing. It's that legal description is going to change, so we need to know that.
So, I brought up Schedule B and exceptions.
Mhm.
And so, I learned under Dave Bickle, and I made sure we ordered an ALTA survey, and there were exceptions. And he also suggested that I have a real estate attorney, which I did, and everything seems fine. Everybody's happy. The survey's been approved, and money changes hands. And then my attorney goes and sits down with Mary, and they start negotiating. What are you negotiating once the closing has happened?
You know,
Which I'm going to say is the final policy.
You know, the only negotiations that I see post-closing are in two areas. One, it's development. So you've just basically closed on the acquisition part. So the attorney's going back to the title company and talking about what's going to be the next phase of the development. Where do we move from here? Because now they've got a lender on board that's going to give them financing for a certain part of the development. That's just one example of why we have talk. The other times we've had talk too, and sometimes this happens, maybe someone's contacted the survey company really late in the game, late in the deal, and they're like, you know, the snow's already flying. I've got all my people out on deals. It's going to be probably 7 weeks before I can get you a finished product. But your client wants to close yesterday. So we'll look at aspects of your client wants certain endorsements that are relied on a survey. Is there a comfort level of closing without those endorsements? And then when the survey is available, hey, they beat the 8 weeks. They got it back in 6.5. You know, coming back, and now we're looking at the survey to issue those survey-related endorsements post-closing. Those are the two primary ones that I see more so than a hiccup.
But those are typically negotiated ahead of time at closing, with the expectation that upon receipt we would issue those.
So I guess back to my question then, the final policy, if I've gotten an ALTA survey, if I'm the real estate attorney, I want a plain policy, no exceptions.
So,
and the ALTA is really the instrument provided to make sure.
So we'll typically work through a pro forma prior to closing, right? And provide those things and negotiate those before we even get to the table.
Okay.
So that counsel has something in hand that says, when we close and this comes to fruition and we issue policy, this is what it will look like. And, you know, sometimes it's a really quick one. Sometimes it's, we're going back and forth 30 times because they have absolute hard no's. We need this gone, and we need certain items to make that happen.
And typically, in my experience, the final policy once the closing has happened, is there, but it's the preliminary with crossouts, notes, and all of
So
that
we
to
call
be
them
used.
Markup, yeah.
Markup, yeah.
Markup, yeah.
Markup's
Because
kind of like
we
a pro
won't,
forma.
we won't issue the actual policy until the recordables have gone through, right? Because we're gonna try to make sure that we're maintaining that gap, that we are issuing with recordable instrument numbers and everything, so you have a full, complete policy. In commercial typically. Now residential, different story, there's a lot of times we can issue policy at the table before recordables are done.
The residential.
Right.
In commercial,
It's very,
everybody cares.
yes.
Yeah.
This is a serious part of our business and our role as a broker, as the captain of the whole transaction, is to know the moving parts and ensure, everything is flowing appropriately in the appropriate direction.
And I love when everybody hears what the options are on the table, because you may know something from your customer that maybe has or has not been communicated with the surveyor or the title company or the attorney. Everybody would hope everybody is operating under the same information, but sometimes that doesn't happen. So that's why I like to, who's driving the bus, who's the great communicator of the transaction, and to give them those options. So there's all that communication going on, like that one with the football field and the thing. We had a lot of people like, what's the next steps? Well, I'm going to go talk to the railroad company. We just kind of hit them over the head with, congratulations, you own the spur, and they're like, what spur? Where? What? And we were lucky. They didn't care about that spur. So that helps in those aspects.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But there's those things that happen.
Yeah, and the problem is too, the railroad companies, all their records are in Jacksonville, Florida. So there's times where surveyors had to fly down to Florida to research who actually owns that railroad. So when we quote surveys, especially ALTA surveys, one of our line items that we dig in, does it back up to water, like a lake? Does it back up to a railroad? Two big items that we say, okay, if one of those things are true, it's getting a lot more research time before we actually quote this project, because if it's an abandoned railroad and we have to fly to Jacksonville, Florida, you're talking about a lot more costs in this transaction. I want to move on because I want to be conscious of your guys' time. You'll hear of something called the Table A in your transaction. This is a checklist box that is requested by the surveyor to be able to quote the survey. Depending on what you check on the Table A is really the biggest benefit of what is put on the ALTA survey and what the cost of the ALTA survey is. So for example, most people that are in the real estate transaction say, I don't know what the Table A items are, right? Generally, the Table A is coming from your lender, and it's coming from your lender's counsel. And it is the requirements that they're going to require, because they already know what endorsements they want. They know what types that they want in the survey. So generally, you're going to get this if you know who the lender is. If you don't know who the lender is, or your property owner doesn't know, we have a lot of data because we've done thousands of surveys, and we say on general, we'll check 1, 2, 3, 4, 6A, 7A, and we'll quote what's called a standard ALTA or standard 2D ALTA. If you come back to us and say, actually, I want 11A on there, we're going to say, listen, 11A could be 2 times the price of the survey. It's literally that big of a difference on what your items are checked. If you're doing a HUD survey, we have sort of a standard HUD deal. So if you're dealing in the intent of the FHA, HUD deals, these things take 2 years to go through on a HUD ALTA. It's generally they close, they go to Washington, D.C., they come back a year later, they close again, and then there's like one final document. So you're going to get a higher cost for HUD survey. Another one too, an ALTA for engineering design. We talked about this earlier. So if you check item 5, which is topographic on your survey cost is probably going to double or triple, right? If you have a 20-acre parcel and you need elevation shots every 20 feet in that parcel, your field time's just tripled, right? Same thing with drafting. Now, what they say is there's no such thing as an ALTA for design. Obviously, there's a lot of information that says that ALTA will tell you that you can't use ALTAs for design. What you generally see is if you're doing a site plan, a vacant lot that's going to be turned into a subdivision, you'll get a lot of what these, you'll add items 5 and 11A or 11B for, show underground utilities. So just as you're going through the transaction, you're going to get a survey quote. They're going to ask for the table A items, number one, and they're going to ask if you have your title commitment of the two things they're going to ask for. If you don't know your table A items, you can take reference of what we recommend as your standard table A items on these type of deals. If you have a lender, you can ask your lender, and they're going to give you what their table A requirements are. One thing, update. Every 4 years, ALTA and NSPS come out with new standards. So it's the two organizations. ALTA is the American Land Title Association. NSPS is the National Society of Professional Surveyors. They join forces to come out with the standards that you can order an ALTA nationwide. So this committee essentially meets and says every 4 years, we're going to update our standards, stay current with what's going on. Just to let you know, they are coming out in February 23 of 2026. So what is that, like 3 months or no from now? They're going to be releasing new standards. If you have a survey this year, generally most councils will not insure it once a new standard comes out because the policy is no longer effective. So what we see is sometimes underwriters will allow previous surveys. But if the standards of ALTA have changed, those table A items in the requirements are no longer valid, and so you can't underwrite them on them. I've seen it where you can use a survey that's 20 years old, and I've seen underwriters that won't let you use a survey that's used 2 years old. So I think it really depends on, like Mary said, if you're using a survey that's 5 years old, that building may or may not be there anymore, right? They could have built a whole new garage or a maintenance shed on that building, and you have no idea because you're using a survey that's 5 years old. So a lot of times when we see new standards come out, it takes a little bit of time to get enrolled. There's not a huge, I consider like when they do these updates, either big updates or small updates every 4 years. The 2021, 2022 updates were big updates, I felt like. I feel like the 2026 are kind of smaller updates. There's some real little ones going in. They updated some stuff about the drone imagery, photographic, showing photos on the survey, and just about explaining how we show information on that. They also added a new table A. So before it was, in 2018, I think it was 1 through 21, and then 2021 they went through 1 through 19, and now they're back to 1 through 20. So they mix up the numbers and they add. Once again, you're just showing, here you go, potential encroachment. So now surveyors will use the word encroachments on ALTAs over property lines when joining properties. So just be aware, you don't need to know all the table A's, but this is the number one thing that a surveyor is going to ask for when they quote it. Because if you check item 1, 2, and 5, your survey is 20 grand. If you survey 1, 2, and 4, your survey is 2 grand, right? And so it just makes a big difference on what items are checked on this checklist to what kind of price that you're going to get on the ALTA.
So, in my 40 years of experience in commercial real estate, I'm hearing about a table A that I should have been submitting all these years. I never submitted one. Was one being filled out by the surveyor?
Generally, the lender's counsel has to fill it out at some point. It can't close without a table A certified.
So the lenders, so it may not be coming through my hand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you should be aware, if you're the broker, you're on this deal, and you're in charge of making this deal go forward, the first question is, what's your address of the property? Second is, do you have a table A list of items? Because it's really hard for us to quote a survey if we don't know that you need 3D, or we don't know that you want to use whatever, you want underground utility locations done by a third party.
But most of that's going to be predicated, most likely there's a lender involved.
There's a lender involved.
And they're really going to drive it.
They're going to drive it, and because they want certain endorsements, and depending on the endorsements they want is going to dictate of what they need to be shown. And what you've seen is, yes, some of these things are standard, and we have sort of a standard list now. About 85% or so of our ALTA surveys are pretty much the same table A items. But you get a HUD survey, you get a 3D survey, you get different requirements in different areas. But if the lender is from out of state, or whatever the case is, they may be used to a different table A item than what your local lender would be used to. So always good if they have a lender on the deal. A lot of times you might get the contract and not know who the lender is going to be, right? They might not have a lender involved, and they're just saying, well, just order me a standard ALTA. If I get a lender who has different things, go ahead and feel free to update your quote, and I'll approve on what it's being updated from. But that is the number one question we ask. What is your table A items? What's your address? And do you have a title commitment with the Schedule Bs on it? Those are the 3 things that we're going to ask as a surveyor to quote your job. 'Cause if you send me a title, title commitment that's 120 pages long, your quote's obviously going to be a little bit longer than if you send me one that's 20 pages long.
And I think the other thing that we see, especially in this lending environment, is if you have a strong customer with a strong balance sheet and assets, they're going to be, going to lenders. Okay, who's going to give me my best deal? So they could have a couple of lenders, and they know they're going to have a loan, but they don't know who they're going to pick yet because they're looking at what everybody's going to give them. So, sometimes I see some lenders, counsels are very sophisticated, and they'll say, well, my client kind of, likes you guys, but, what are you going to want for title? How many endorsements are you going to want? How much is that going to cost? So they'll look at some of that pricing and everything and want to know. Some of them, while they're courting them, they don't get into those detailed items and are just looking like interest rates, what are you going to want for that commitment? So we realize that that's sometimes, I think Kelly and I had a deal about 2.5 months ago. We didn't know who the lender was until the week of, and I think the shortest one I probably had is 5 hours. We had loan packages from 2 lenders in escrow, and they just, and so we're like, tell us which one you're going to go to. So I would have loved to seen the beauty pageant behind the scenes of what the lenders were giving them, flowers and cake, and
If you guys have any questions about the survey aspect of anything that we do, our process, questions about surveys that you have done, or you have a question about transaction, feel free to reach out to us and Mary as well. If you have questions about the title aspect of things, anything on the title commitment side of things, Mary would be great to recognize and reach out to.
Where do we find, where can we get a copy of the Table A? So that's
we can email that to you.
Yeah, so they're on the, you can email to we were welcome to too. And also this new one, I just got a draft from Gary Kent, who's on the ILPS, but I think it's one vote away at the ALTA conference, I think next month, of being approved. And then it will be, I don't know, it's ratified or whatever the case is, constitutionalized in February. But you can get a copy of the draft, which is really the final version from what I understand now. They essentially start the draft in March of 26, and then it's a draft until 4 years go by, and then it becomes finalized about 4 or 5 months before they put it into law. So they are constantly making tweaks to it even after they're approved. So this new one will be out. It is out now. I have a copy. I can send it to you. And the one that is currently active, if you order a survey today, Mary can send to you. And it's on the ALTA's website as well. Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting us here today.
Yeah.
And we spoke briefly if Mr. Bickle could get us on the schedule, maybe after the first of the year. All the underwriters came out with new endorsements for commercial policies that some of them are pretty close to what they had previously, but the new ones are a lot more extensive. So we'd love to come back and give you a flash recap of that as well if you have time.
Super.
Thank you.
Now that I'm a title insurance expert.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very nice to with you. It was fantastic. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Love the stories. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to see you at the bars.
Thanks so much.
So good to see you again.
Good questions. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, look at the Bar Association, see if they've got some vacant times that they're still looking for CE next year. Maybe that would be something you'd be interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. I love speaking to the Bar Association. They're great attorneys. You come in there.
Oh yeah.
I do. I enjoy it.
Levels of
Yeah,
experience,
exactly.
too.
Exactly.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us in. Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
I'm gonna end this recording.
That keeps you honest
I'm
about
not
where you're going.
I'm not the best.